how to troubleshoot and debug using the browser inspector tools and a few tricks in VS Code as well. This is Lisa, and today I'm going to share with you tips on how to troubleshoot and debug your projects and a recommendation for a couple of extensions, a browser extension and a VS Code extension that will help you with debugging. If you enjoy this type of content, please give it a thumbs up. Let's check it out.
Alright, so I'm in my browser right now. I have Chrome open, and this will work for other browsers as well. The first thing I want to look at is the developer tools here in the browser, or your inspector. So you can access those a couple different ways. You can right-click anywhere on the page or on a specific element. Let's go ahead and right-click on this title here. And what I have open right now is the project that I created for you guys to practice your shortcuts. So if you want to get access to that free project, the link will be in the description, as well as the shortcuts video that it goes along with. So we have our inspector open here now. I just went right-clicked on it and clicked into the inspect here. You can also go up here to these three dots and go to more tools, developer tools here. That will open this as well. And in Firefox, it's very similar. I think it just says inspect element. Now we have this panel with all the elements in the DOM that are showing up in the browser here. I have some extra things showing up when I hover over these different elements. You'll see that this div.container is 1887 by 209.14 pixels. So it shows you the size. And you'll also see little rulers that are popping up around the edge of the screen. And those are options that you can turn on in here. Before we go, let's also visit the settings in here. So just for the elements, a few things that you might want to turn on are the rulers, word wrap, showing comments, showing the node when you hover it, so that when you hover over the element, it kind of has that little box around it, showing the shadow in the DOM, showing the detailed inspect tooltip that has like the width and the height and such. And then there's some other things pertaining to the console, these sources. So take a look in here and turn some of these options on if you like to help you in your debugging as well. And also, one more tool that I really like that I would recommend is an extension called CSS Spice, and it is developed by Kyle from Study Web Development. So here it is on Gumroad, CSS Spice. You can search for it. I'll leave the link in the description below. I'll show you briefly what it does here. It is a paid extension. It's an affordable price. I really enjoy it myself. So now if I turn on CSS Spice, now we have even more visual feedback. We see these little red lines, these little boundaries surrounding each element, and we can visualize the space between them. We can hover over them and see the styles that are applying. We can click to copy these styles. We can press space to pin and edit these styles. Okay, so we can do some wonderful things in here. You have lots of options. You can turn this off if you don't want to have that in your way while you're doing something. Lots of fun stuff in here. So I highly recommend that plugin if you need something that's a little more visual and helping you to inspect these different areas as well. And that one is a great tool. So just exploring these elements in here. When you are running into an issue and you're trying to figure out what's going on, you can right-click directly on whatever item is having the issue and inspect it, and that will take you right to the spot of that element here. So now you can see this anchor here is highlighted in blue, and you'll see the HTML that is behind it. And also in the display part up here, when I hover over the element, you'll see that it highlights it, and it shows you sort of the borders, the boundaries, and where this element is on the page within the rulers. So you can move back and forth between these elements. Now look how we have some orange and green and blue. Now that is going to correspond to something that we can see over here in the styles panel. So you can configure this a number of different ways. I like to have it down here at the bottom for the most part. So down here, notice these colors that kind of match up with what we were seeing here. Let's select one of these elements like this UL that had those colors around it. So you'll see the orange, and this corresponds to our box model here. So down here in the box model, you can also hover over and see the existing values. So the main content area, which is blue, we have some padding, 40 pixels, which is on the left side. And you have the border, which this one does not have a border, and you have 16 pixels of margin on both the bottom and the top. And you'll see little dashes for the areas that don't have any value. So that is very handy in exploring those elements, figuring out the spacing that's around them, where they lie. So if something is getting you confused on why something is in the wrong place, you can go and kind of get more of a visual interpretation of where the spacing is. And that can be very helpful in figuring out what the issue is. So you might have a stray tag somewhere that you don't expect it to be, and one of these elements might be appearing outside of the area you want it to be in. You can help narrow that down by looking in here, seeing where the tags are showing up in your browser, and perhaps you need to move the element around within your code. So that is in just this styles over here, this box model. And you'll see all these styles associated with whatever element you click on over here on the right-hand side. So this is a good opportunity for us to say, I have this UL with a class of right, tight, on, medium, and down. Why are these styles not showing up in here? That's one of the most common debugging things. Why are my styles not working on my page? So what you can do is so the next thing would be to check our sources tab. Now in the sources, you can look at your domain and all of the resources that it's using in here. So we can see that we have some images loading for the page. We have some JavaScript, materialized CSS that's being used, and the index here. And you can also visualize the actual code of the source in here. So we have the index selected, and we're expecting to get a materialize CSS style sheet in here. Well, now you take a look and see that attribute name is not correct. href has 2 Fs, so it looks like all these links have an issue with that. Somebody made a typo, part of the project. So if you wanted to get the styles in there, you could go now over to your code and fix it. So you can open up your code editor, and sure enough, your href attribute has a typo in it, so it's not loading any of your styles. Okay, so if you're wondering why something is not applying, check and make sure the resource is being pulled into your project. Same thing with the JavaScript. If you don't specify the correct path for your CSS file, your JavaScript file, then it is not going to appear in here. Down here at the bottom, our script tags here, materialize and jQuery, we know that those are loading in here because they appear over here, and we can click on them and take a look at the code right in here. And Chrome has this nice little pretty print thing that you can use as well that will format it. Even if it's like a minified version of something, then it can help you visualize what's in the code. You can see jQuery down here. jQuery is loading in okay. Okay, so you can check in and see. Okay, so it's good to check your resources. If an image isn't loading and it's within your project folder, make sure it's showing up in here. And if it's not, if it says it can't access that, you'll usually get an error message in here that says it can't find the image. And then you need to check the path and figure out where that image is located. So let's go down to one of these images here and right click on this and inspect it. So we're looking here at the image source, and when you hover over the source path, you should see the little image preview show up in here. So let's edit this just for fun. Let's take off the 1 and click out of it. Now we can see that the image is no longer loading correctly here. You can see that the preview doesn't load when you hover over it. You can also right click on it and try to open it in a new tab, and it will tell you it can't find this image. So when we go to this URL, it's not loading the image correctly. Well, now at this point you can say, okay, I know this image is in my images folder. You can open your file explorer or your project folder, look in your images folder and see what that name is and see if the path matches. Well, now I see that the URL path has a 1 on the end, and that is missing from my path. So let's just test it here in this URL without editing it over there first. You can add the one, and now we're going to hit enter to reload. And now we see that with the correct name of the image, it loads up here in our browser. And this is the correct path for the image. Okay, so that'll give you a way to kind of troubleshoot. You can do that right in here inside the inspector. Okay, if you double click on that value, it will let you edit it. So you can go back in here, add the one, hit enter, and now that image is loading up in the preview again. Here it is. You can edit things directly in here when you're playing around and working on your projects. Let's say you want to figure out this container class, if that's causing issues. Well, you can go right in there, double click to be able to edit it and get rid of it and see what it looks like without that class. So now everything is missing the container. We can now go back in here and add the class back. Well, we don't have our style sheet hooked up, so we're not really going to visually see that right now, but you get the picture. So you can edit things directly in here and play around with them. You can also add and edit these styles over in the styles. Okay, so let me open the final version of this project now so we can get a better picture and inspect a few things here. Now let's just inspect this little icon here. We have this icon coming in right here. We hover over it, we can see the size, and we can scroll through and see any margins, padding, see what's going on here. Okay, now when we select this element that has that container class on it, over here in our styles, since our style href has been corrected, we can now see all the styles that relate to that class and anything else that pertains to whatever it is that we have selected. So you can scroll through here and see everything that's applying and kind of figure out if there's something that you didn't expect to be influencing this element, maybe from a parent that it's inheriting. And you can play around with just checking and unchecking these values if you want to just test what it's like without these styles. And then you can also go ahead and I'm going to refresh that. You can also edit the values. So let's take it down to 20%. Now these are really small. So you can play around and edit the values in here. You can add your own. You can set whatever properties, and it's very useful because they'll pop up these little hints and give you some options here. Let's just do 500 pixels here. Okay, and you can copy and paste these styles and take them over into your project once they're at a place where you are happy with how they look. That can be very, very handy. Okay, so this inspector is very powerful. You can do a lot of things. You can even copy some of these elements once you've edited them. So let's say you make some edits here. Let's add another class. Let's say our class is test class. And then I go ahead and add a test class style. Let's do test class. And let's just do a background here. Background of blue just for fun. Now you'll see when you edit here that this pops up as under the source of a inspector style sheet. So if you are playing around in a bunch of these things, editing them, you can actually click on this inspector style sheet and it will keep everything that you've added in this little style sheet, and you can now copy that and add it into your project once you're ready. Now we have that, and let's say we want to also add this element class and just copy it. So you can right click on that and we get some good options here. We can copy this element. We can also copy things like the selector, and we can cut the element and move it around in the DOM here if we want to. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and copy that element and go back over to my code and just show you here that we can paste. I'm not going to do it in context. I'm just going to show you that we can paste. Now, something to notice. So we started right about here. Now notice it copies everything inside of that element. So you can play around with some of those things. Now while we're in here, I want to show you a couple extra things. Let's actually see if we have any pseudo elements. for after, here we go. So this element is after this section. It's actually after a row. So after a row, we have some extra content here just to help the display. Now this little pink thing with the double colon, that's the pseudo element. And you can play around with those just as well. They now show up in the browser. They didn't used to have to turn on an extra option and to be able to see these, but now they show up inside the parent here. So we have an after on this row class, so it kind of shows up inside that row element just at the very bottom. Okay, and if it were a before, it would show up right after the opening tag here. Now, one common thing, let me just refresh this here. One common thing you might want to play around with is debugging or editing the styles of your buttons. Let's go to this element here, this button. Often we have styles that are affected by the user's interaction, and we kind of call these states. So if you right click on this button, you can go to force state and you can trigger the hover. So what that will allow you to do is now take a look at the styles that are applying to this button when it's hovering without having to actually physically hover it. Okay, and you'll see this little dot over here that shows you that that is being applied, and you see a little check. And you can apply all of these or take them off, just like that. That's very, very useful. Often you'll see things like links have an active state, a focus state, visited state, different things like that. So if you need to figure out where a style is coming from, you can turn all these on and then take a look and see which one is applying to that state there. You can edit the entire thing as HTML if you just want to be able to freely type in the whole thing rather than just like one little part of it here. A lot of great options in here. Let's say you scroll around. You can also use this scroll into view to help it push you back so you can see where you're at on the page. You can visit your computed property area here, which is that box model here again, but rather than showing you a list of all the different styles that are applying, it will just show you the end result, all the styles that are specific to this element. And you can see here the result. So we can see that it has a width of 1280 pixels, a height of 54, font size, etc. And if you need to know where that style is coming from, you can hover over it and you'll see this little arrow here. You can click on that and it will take you right to where that style is coming from. So that style of this somewhat barely transparent white color is coming from this parallax container, which must be a parent to the current element here. And you can see where it's coming from, this style sheet. You can click on it and go take a look at the actual style within context here. So this is usually my go-to for helping students and people figure out where things are going wrong. They say something's broken, I don't know how to fix it. So first you need to kind of understand what is wrong, what's different than what you would expect. So you come to your inspector here and you say something's off about this. You inspect it, you open things up, take a look and see if the tags are showing up in the place in the order that you expect them to be, if they have the content inside them that you expect them to, and if they don't, we need to figure out why. And at that point, that's when you usually go back to your code and check and see if you have matching opening and closing tags, if everything's in the right place, and make adjustments as necessary. A couple things that will help with that is formatting. Take the time to get in the good habit of creating good formatting, okay? If you don't want to take the time to do it all yourself, which is good at the beginning just so you get used to it, you can install tools to help you so that when you save, it will automatically format for you, or you can use a keyboard shortcut to format it for you. One that I would recommend an extension for just basic HTML is called Beautify, and you can open up this little extension tab here without going into too much detail in this video. Search for Beautify, find that one, and install it here. Once you install it, I recommend setting up a keyboard shortcut for that one. Go to File, Preferences, or Code Preferences on Mac, and go to your keyboard shortcuts. Search for Beautify, and you can set up a key binding here by clicking Edit, Beautify File. Control-Alt-B is the one that I've set up. Okay, so whenever I use that keyboard shortcut, it jumps and formats everything nicely for me. Okay, so that will help. Now, once you have everything formatted correctly, it becomes a lot easier for you to see if you're missing opening, closing tags, opening braces, brackets, all that stuff. Okay, so get into the habit of checking while you're coding to make sure that you have opening and closing tags matching up everywhere. Make sure that you don't start writing content inside an element until you have that opening and closing tag if you need them. Okay, then you don't forget once you're done actually adding content to it. So checking your formatting, use something like Beautify if you want to make sure things are lining up correctly. And then you can use these little carrots on the side to close up and see, yes, things are matching up in my head and body. Those have the basics. You can start closing things to make sure they match. You can also kind of hover over it, and you'll see that this line here gets darker. And if you follow it all the way down, which this is kind of long, you'll see that the closing tag is highlighted. So if I do the script here, it highlights the closing tag for me. Okay, so you can have some help with your editor. This is VS Code, the one that I recommend for my students. Help you out with some of these things, checking to make sure all of your tags are set up correctly. Sometimes it's hard to see what's right in front of you, so using those tools like Beautify is a really good resource. Another thing that I recommend is to use something like Emmet, the Emmet shortcuts, and I have a video. You can check that out here in the card. As I mentioned before, it will really help you out. So if you're typing UL and you're using Emmet, it's got the opening and closing tags already set up for you, and you don't have to worry about typing all that out, and that helps a lot with getting things scaffolded out correctly. Now, a couple other places to check. If you have your project running, if you're doing React or something else that requires a node server and you're running in the terminal here, open up your terminal and read through and check for errors. Learn to get familiar with what things mean, what the errors mean, how to use those to solve problems. Okay, so if there's errors, make sure you're checking your terminal when you have projects that are running on a server. Otherwise, always make sure you check your JavaScript console in the browser. Okay, those yellow ones are just warnings, and a lot of the time the errors will be red if it's something significant. Okay, so check through those errors, and over time you'll get more familiar with which things are actually likely breaking your project. Now, the order of errors matters. Sometimes your project breaks because of one error, and then the rest of the errors after it don't show up until you fix the one before it. So after you fix one error, the rest of the errors might show up. Things like that happen. So it's important to go back, practice troubleshooting, testing things out, figuring out what is the problem, why is this coming out the way it is, are there errors in the console, in the terminal, in my code. So that's where I encourage all my students to start using the inspector, checking for errors, and when you go to ask questions, provide enough context so that we can help you properly. Whether you're asking people in your own communities, in Slack, Stack Overflow, whatever it is, in order for you to get good help, you have to provide good context. Be specific on what you're working on, what you've tried, what worked, what didn't work. Provide the actual code so we can see it, so that we can try it out. If you have GitHub, if you have your project up anywhere that we can actually inspect it live in the browser, all those things will help us be able to help you a lot faster. And the last thing that I'll mention today with debugging is to do what we call talking to a rubber duck. So many times when we're staring at our own code for hours and hours, we can't really see what's right in front of us. It gets really hard. So sometimes you need to just ask someone else to take a look at it. Now, we call this rubber ducking because you can just imagine, or you can get an actual physical rubber duck and you just talk to the duck. You explain to it the problem. You show it where in your code things are going wrong, where in the browser. When you kind of take yourself outside of the problem and try explaining it to someone else, whether or not they're real, whether or not they're a rubber duck, you'd be amazed at how fast you can find things that you could not even see before. It just takes telling someone else, listening to yourself from a different perspective, and then you can really see things from a different way. Sometimes you have to just step away for a few minutes and come back, and you'll see things that you didn't see before as well. So those are my beginning starter tips. If you want more specific details on any of those areas, there's lots more fabulous things you can do with the developer tools in the browser. You can do debugging with JavaScript. You can do all sorts of things.
So these are pretty simple tips that get often overlooked by my beginning students and others that I tutor as well. So I hope you'll take some time to get to know these tools, and let me know if you want any more in-depth detail on how to use these. There's a lot more you can do with the inspector tools, the JavaScript debugger. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any other requests or recommendations, let me know. Happy coding, and I'll see you in the next video.